Thanks for joining me, everyone. Charles Moskowitz here. I don't know about you, but I am finding this whole Trump impeachment charade to be particularly depressing and ominous. You know, they're holding these committee meetings behind closed doors. It's being done by a committee that is not supposed to really do it, or at least traditionally hasn't conducted impeachment hearings, that being the Intelligence Committee. The hearing from CIA operatives, which in a sense is, from my perspective, is a pretty open attempt by the deep state, what President Trump calls the deep state, to overthrow the government by impeaching President Trump. And now that President Trump is calling American forces back from the border of Syria and Turkey, they're going to be going into, I think, a frenzy in terms of trying to get rid of President Trump. In a sense, I'm hoping and I pray that I'm wrong here, but this act might really have sealed his doom. God forbid. Because I don't think there's anything that the establishment, and when I say the establishment, I'm talking both Democrat and Republican, holds more sacred than America's perpetual involvement in foreign wars and foreign nation building. This is the globalist agenda. And President Trump is the first president, really probably since Wilson, or before Wilson, who has even taken a moderate measure of disengaging the United States from these perpetual wars. And as such, it's not only a literal shift in policy in the sense of calling back our troops, securing our men and women and bringing them home and reducing this cost, but it is a profound philosophical change from the way this country has conducted its business, probably over the past 100 years, as a quote-unquote superpower who has to intervene and have bases and military operation and presence in every corner of the planet, to be a world empire, almost in the old sense, almost like the way the Roman Empire operated. All under the guise that officially we're preserving peace, but in fact, there's no evidence of that. I think we're perpetuating war in most cases. And I'm not an isolationist in that, you know, there may be situations in the future where the United States would have a direct benefit and a national interest or even a moral interest in intervening militarily. If you have a situation in a nation where the human rights become so bad and the abuse of people becomes so horrendous, then yeah, maybe we could, you know, consider that as an event to intervene by maybe offering our diplomatic office as a neutral party, and in a last resort situation, sure, intervene militarily, or maybe do it through the UN. I think it might have been appropriate, for example, for the United States to intervene in the 1990s in the Rwanda conflict, because there was a genocide going on there. And yet we did nothing, and neither did the UN, which is all very interesting. And that's a whole different subject. But the point I'm making is that we don't need to be involved in these perpetual military engagements. They are not creating peace. Maybe with some exceptions. I think one exception actually would be Korea, where American presence probably is required, since there's a North Korean crazy communist state that does indeed threaten the South. And until that can be resolved diplomatically, then we will have to maintain military leverage there. I mean, I get that. Again, I'm not an isolationist. But as far as, you know, the Middle East is concerned, I mean, really, are we helping the Syrians by having an army on the ground there? Wouldn't it be a better idea to let Syria consolidate itself again under Assad? Is he evil? I don't think there are too many Islamic nations and leaders that are not, in my opinion. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. Do we really want to get judgmental about that? These are Sharia-oriented states with this very little individual freedom. But yet, they are sovereign and they have a right to be as such. If the people want to suffer under that regime, fine, that's their right. We can offer our good services. I think the best thing we could do is lead by example. Free people here, and the rest of the world will look to that with yearning eyes, at least the people of the world, and eventually they will be encouraged to get rid of their own systems and enter into the Western world or enter into the modern world in their own version, not necessarily emulating the United States, but maybe embracing some of the universal principles that we've embraced ourselves and did so at the time of our own founding of our Constitution and our republic. These are not, I don't mean chauvinistically to say they should be like America. I'm saying that the United States embraced principles, I would contend, come from the Torah and come from the ministry of Jesus and come from Greco-Roman understanding of law and several other developments that are available to all people. But for us to have this perpetual military presence, it goes to not only an insecurity on our part, but it goes to a psychosocial mindset that has populated our establishment, again, for at least the last century. And that is this idea that the United States should become a leader of, and then eventually nothing more than a cog of a new world order. And that we need to, in a sense, be strong around the world while at the same time weaken ourselves in support of that, weaken ourselves by depleting ourselves financially and by essentially subsidizing other nations through our own resources, and thus gradually create a quote-unquote equality where all nations will become like provinces of the world, and you're going to have a world order. Now, this really cockamamie idea is something that is taken as an article of faith by the world's establishment, by the world's elite, people that are both seen as on the left and on the right. And there are several other elements of their personality that are interesting. I mean, I'm just studying this now, actually, as a student of sociology. I've been reading C. Wright Mills. I've been reading his book, The Sociological Imagination, and then I'm going to read his book, The Power Elite. And I'm actually in the process of developing, as a student of sociology, the working title of which I'm calling right-wing sociology, right? I mean, bell hooks developed feminist sociology. Sociology is the sociological imagination opens up many possibilities, and I'm beginning to apply mine as I learn and as I develop into a principle that right-wing principles are optimal for human societies. And I'm beginning to develop papers and ideas that are going to make that case over time. This is probably going to be the topic of my next book. By the way, my books are available at Amazon.com if you're interested. But getting back to the topic at hand here, President Trump's withdrawal from Syria is an extreme and actually quite a radical change in terms of the way the United States officially has conducted itself for the past century. It is the first time we are disengaging. And I would contend that if President Trump is reelected, and God willing he will be, he's going to do more of this. He's probably going to begin disengaging and withdrawing American forces from Europe, God willing. We don't need to be there. Why are we in Germany? I mean, the Soviet Union collapsed in 1989. Do you think Russia's going to start invading Germany? I don't think so. I think Germany can take care of itself. I think that Italy can take care of itself. These nations, if they're destroying themselves, that's a tragedy, but they're sovereign and they have a right to do it, to function in their own interest. And I think they're beginning to do that. An example of that, of course, is Great Britain exiting the European Union. That's a fantastic development. We ought to support our allies diplomatically, with trade, economically, but we don't need to be there with our armies. We don't need to be there with our military. We need to be there as examples of the world, as a light unto the nations, to use a biblical saying. This was the vision that God had for the Jewish people, right? It's also the vision that America should embrace, because we've embraced the principles of the Torah as a nation and as a society. And that doesn't mean that we need to go out there with our men and women in uniform and get our foot blown off in landmines. Syria can take care of itself. The Kurds can take care of themselves. And I think that from what I understand, just to wrap things up here, the Kurds have made an agreement with Assad, and the agreement is that they are going to be, they'll be able to assume autonomy in their region of Syria, while at the same time form an alliance with Damascus to check the advance of the Turks and keep ISIS out of the picture. Now, that's the same arrangement that the Kurds have in Iraq. They have autonomy in exchange for cooperation with Baghdad and maintaining the peace in that country. To me, it is an excellent solution because it's in the interests of the nations involved. And the fact that we're there militarily has prevented that from happening. Now, if we're afraid of Russia doesn't have, if Russia wants to go in and expand their army in those countries, then they're going to get stuck in the same quagmire we were stuck in. Russia should have learned a lesson from their involvement in Afghanistan. It was one of the major contributors to the collapse of the Soviet Union. I don't think Russia wants to go through that, and I think if they do, then they're foolish. And we shouldn't worry about that. We have to operate in our own interests. Doesn't mean we're less of a superpower. While President Trump is reassessing America's perpetual war policy, and he's moving us toward an America first, at the same time, he has improved our military. He's invested money in improving it. And I think that those two things combined put us in an excellent position because, first of all, we are absolutely able to defend ourselves from any enemy in any direction. But secondly, we're developing the technologies that would allow us to engage in a foreign war, God forbid, if we have to, if a nation becomes so either down in terms of their human rights to their own people, or if they become so aggressive in terms of moving militarily in a way that threatens neighbors, then we can engage, but not with troops. That's old-fashioned. We don't need to do that anymore in this day and age. We don't need to put men and women's lives at risk. We can do it with super bombs. We have President Trump, when he first came to office, demonstrated the power of the MOBE, M-O-B-E. It's just short of a nuclear bomb, and I'm not in any way suggesting we do nuclear. God forbid, that's bad. But we can use our military technologies, our drone technologies, our cyber technologies, and others to act very decisively anywhere in the world if we have the will to do it and if we want to do it. We should not do it unless it's absolutely a last resort. But I'm bringing it up only to make the point that in this day and age and in our century, we don't need to have men and women going out and risking their lives to fight a war for someone else. And if other people want to do that, we have to tolerate it and not be fearful of it. We've got nothing to be afraid of. We can handle it. And so I think President Trump should be applauded for his policy in Syria. I think it's farsighted. I think it is what he always said he would do. I think it's practical. And I also think, philosophically speaking, it is creating a new paradigm in terms of how we are to operate in the world and how we are to see ourselves. And that is a positive, sensible paradigm of sovereignty, of America first, and of asking other nations to engage in their own sovereignty and their own placing of their own nations first. And that is happening. It's happening in England with Brexit. It's happening in some other countries of Europe. It may even be happening in Syria. And I think that those are positive developments. Anyway, thanks for watching, everyone. Charles Moskowitz here. Have a great afternoon.